So I've just finished watching the third episode for a second time. I like to wait a few days and then watch it again. This episode is shorter than the first two and maybe not quite as strong, but it's still good. Definitely the star of this episode would be Maximus. He evolved. He also gives as good as he's taken. He does a little bit of hazing on the squire that arrives, Thaddeus. He's the guy who had led the beatdowns back at the camp, but Maximus does show restraint, and we see him embody the ideals that he believes a knight of the Brotherhood of Steel should exhibit. And that's kind of an instance of this episode subverting the audience's expectations. If you watch the previews, we see shots of Thaddeus, that squire on his back, squealing. We're thinking, okay, that guy's going to get his comeuppance, but that's not actually what happens. Maximus saves him after Thaddeus saves him beforehand. And midway through the episode, he tells him that the hazing that Maximus had experienced had been, in the view of Thaddeus, really just a rite of passage. It was nothing personal. He expresses regret. Another instance of this episode subverting expectations. Cooper talks to the woman who we assume is his wife, or will be his wife. Okay, so this is how they meet. We're going to be subjected to a plotting sequence of their courtship. We realize, oh, okay, they're already married and they have a daughter at this point. So it's just their way of interacting, especially when they both seem to be at work. Another common theme in this episode, I would say, the pros and cons of strong community culture. Looking at Thaddeus, he is definitely drinking the Kool-Aid of the Brotherhood of Steel. He's very subservient, deferential, obedient. That's kind of the negative thing, right? Like cultures, places where hazing and strict adherence to authority, that can be problematic, let's say. I mean, looking at history, yesterday, April 30 was the anniversary of the suicide of Adolf Hitler. We all know the general history. That's evidence, an example of groupthink, strong groupthink, overwhelming a population. We kind of see the same thing among the Vault Dwellers, right? When they're at that town hall discussing what they should do with the raiders whom they have in captivity. They're very optimistic. They believe that through empathy and forgiveness and education, they can reform the raiders and integrate them into their society. Of course, the only person who audibly expresses opposition to that mindset is Norman. I've never really mentioned him in my prior videos of the show, but he's becoming an interesting character. He's thinking critically, and he's no fool, right? He sees the raiders for who they are. They're beyond redemption or reformation. And the woman, Lucy's friend, the pregnant woman, she tells him afterward that she agrees with him. She believes that, it should be eye for an eye. And Lucy herself, she's still portraying that naivete, that strong belief in that moralistic and optimistic worldview that the golden rule applies up on the surface, but the ghoul tells her no, it doesn't. And that line about being sidetracked by bullshit, I understand. I guess it's like a wink and a nod to the players of the series because it's a reference to all the side quests that tend to come up and distract the player from the main quest or mission in the games. You could say the same thing for most RPGs. Some cool shots. I mean, I'm not a filmmaker, but I've done a little bit of studying of the visual language of filmmaking, movies and shows, angles and shots. We do see a couple of instances of Lucy's paraphernalia, that box of deviled eggs that she takes out to eat, and a close-up of her mangled boot when she's fighting off that giant axolotl. And later we see instances of those same paraphernalia that Maximus encounters, and the camera lingers on his face to show his reaction. Even though they've just met briefly, we can tell that they like each other. They're really enamored with each other. And that's one thing, not just for this show, but any show or movie in general. There's so much that you miss by not looking. Things that are conveyed just through nonverbal things like facial expressions and music and shots. Sometimes I'll just let movies and shows play in the background and not really pay attention, but you can really deny yourself a better understanding of stories if you don't actually look. Interesting things, the giant axolotl, I think it's supposed to be an axolotl. It's this salamander that's native to Central America near Mexico, and it has the capability to regenerate limbs. The ghoul calls it a gulper or something. It seems to have humanoid features, like its upper arms look like human arms, and the cilia-like things on its palate, they're human fingers, so maybe it's been spliced with human DNA through environmental mutations, or maybe it's the result of experimentation. Lucy's still Lucy. She still has that very naive, the golden rule applies, do unto others as you would want done to you. The ghoul is cunning as you expect. He uses Lucy as bait, but when the winch gets stuck, he grabs a hook, pulls in the pulley to get Lucy back onto the pier to prevent her from getting killed. I don't think it's because he actually likes her. He just realizes that he can't lose her at that point. We also get a sense of his unsentimental approach. He's formed a bond with the dog CX404, saving it from certain death. But after the encounter with the axolotl and he leads Lucy away, he just kind of abandons it, and he tells her that it's not his dog, which is understandable because he's been a ghoul, a ghost, a specter for over 200 years. Ghouls are almost like a species or a race, a subrace of humans that have withstood radiation over decades, hundreds of years, and they still manage to survive. They still exhibit human physiological needs, right? They have to drink water like the ghoul does, and he has to inject himself with chemicals to stay alive. I'm assuming that he has to eat as well, but he's not the only of his kind, in other words. And if you hadn't known that, you would know that from this episode because Thaddeus the Squire mentions or implies that other ghouls exist. Interesting clues of the location in the present day. The ghoul and Lucy are wandering through that wasteland. The ghoul notices, he actively looks at this statue with this fallen, hollowed globe, and that same statue had been in the first flashback at the start of the episode. It hadn't been as prominent. It'd been in the background, but if you've been paying attention, then that gives you a sense of where they are geographically in the present day. And there's also a sign of the Hollywood Boulevard, but just it being by this poison radiated lake gives you a sense of how much the geography, the landscape had changed as a result of that nuclear Armageddon. I like the music, especially when the axolotl was chasing Thaddeus. I like it. It seems like the bulk of the music is around like the 30s, 1930s to 1950s. This universe definitely has the pastiche of the 1950s. In the flashback, we see like architecture, fashion, technology that resembles the 1950s, but it's actually 120 odd years later. So something that's a bit unclear to me. Like I understand the creators have intentionally imitated the aesthetics of the 1950s, but why would the people in that universe be having that same style? Like, are they intentionally imitating the aesthetics of like 120 years before their time, or has humanity just been stuck in that style? Are they just so unimaginative, or have they been so preoccupied with other things that they haven't bothered to change their hairstyles, for example? That's something that I might ask Tim Kaine. I don't know if you've seen any of his videos. He had worked on the original, the first two Fallout games, and he discusses stories and so on. I think I might message him. So the first third of this season is done. I'm kind of leery about the next section, but I think there are some interesting threads. The mystery, the apparent mystery of Vault 32, and seeing what Norm does and how he handles his conflicting view with that of the council and the rest of the Vault 33 community. random thing. I just finished watching American Fiction, and Leslie Uggams is a character in that movie, and she plays the woman on the triumvirate council. I really like how they're kind of like vying for leadership. So that's interesting. Nice touch of comedy. So is the middle third of the season going to be as good as the first third? I don't know. As long as it ends strong. I don't mind if the next few episodes are more deliberate in their pacing, as long as they set up something interesting later on.